Welcome to Tax and Media Group. My name is Mark Anderson. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is weapon disarming. We're going to go over a couple of different techniques as well as some of the body mechanics that go behind it. So let's get started and look at our first technique. Alright, so in this technique, basically we're facing a firearm, and the first thing we've got to do is we've got to be able to explode off the X. Okay, so we've got to get out of the way of the line of fire. With that, we've got to be able to also close the distance so that we get past the firearm at the same time. So you don't want to move simply to the side, you want to move towards at an angle. So that does two things. One, it gets you out of the line of fire of the round itself, and it also gets you closer to the shooter itself. Now, if the weapon is pointed at your head, then you have the ability to basically slip it a lot easier. However, the weapon can possibly go off if once you get your hands on it, you start struggling for it. So you do have to be careful in that sense. So one of the things I recommend is as you are moving at an angle, closing the distance, turn your head slightly away to be able to kind of protect that in case the weapon goes off. It's going to hurt your hearing. It's going to possibly blind you if you're not careful. Right? So you do have to be aware of that possibility. Now, once you've done that and you've closed the gap, you've got some options here. If your hands end up to where you've got one hand left and right on either side of his arm, then that's one technique right there. You've got some options to strike the face, things like that. What happens sometimes too is if you panic and you basically just respond to that threat automatically, your hands might end up on the outside. There's nothing wrong with that. They're both good techniques and they're both very pliable. So what we can do from there is very similar in the body mechanics application. So from here we're able to actually start basically blocking, closing that distance, and at the same time we can start to basically attack that arm and immobilize it. So once we attack that arm and immobilize it, we want to bring it as close to our body as possible, get in close to our shooter as possible, and drive that person down. Now, we don't know the condition of the firearm either when we strip it out of their hand, so what we want to do is we want to basically use it as a hammer. So in this technique, we can also do the opposite as well. So what happens if our hand ends up on the inside? So if our hand ends up on the inside and the firearm is trapped here, we now have another option of being able to collapse that arm. Okay, and it has to be a pretty fast maneuver because we are close to his core, which is where he's strongest, but we're not completely inside of it. Okay, we got his arm kind of on the outside of it, so we have the momentum here. And if you look, you can see where his arm and pistol are inside, and both of my hands are inside of my area, my core area, where I'm the strongest. So I have better leverage, which is why you don't want to stand far out. You want to keep close to the body whenever you create this kind of maneuver. You've got to be able to overcome quickly, and the best control that you have to do a fast maneuver is to do it close. And at that point, you strip it from his hand, and then you can use your elbow or something like that to basically shuck them off of you. So that's the basic concept there. So to show it one more time, you see the firearm comes up, you can go in, you trap, you bend it down, and at this point you can also steer him into the ground. So as you're stripping away the firearm, you've got him off balanced, you're in the same position, the weapon, both your hands are in your core area, and he's kind of off balance and outside of his core area, so then you can just drop him right to the ground. Okay, so now this technique's a little bit different in the sense that he's using two arms instead of just one hand. But in reality, it's actually easier. People think they have more control of a firearm. Well, they do when they're shooting it, but not when they're retaining it. Because in reality, I'm actually able to tie up both your hands at the same time by basically coming in and trapping, by coming over and trapping both those arms and bending it up. Okay, that pinches your hands. It's close to my core. We're kind of aligned a little bit until I rotate, and then you're off balance, and I have basically both your hands and the firearm under my control. Right, and from there, I'm going to just drive you into the ground and then remove the weapon. I can drive you forward or I can drive you to the rear. It really depends on what kind of force I'm getting back or resistance I'm getting back. So in this technique we have a weapon behind us. However, one of the things to remember is that when you are when someone approaches you from the rear with a weapon, you want to make sure that weapon is touching your back. So if you have to back up a little bit, then so be it, because I don't really know where the firearm is at that point. So the second it touches, that's the second you have to initiate your maneuver. So if it means raising your hands and saying, hey, sorry, you know, what do you want, whatever, anything like that. Some people teach to try and look over his shoulder, see what hand he is, if he's left or right-handed. It really doesn't matter. Techniques will work either hand it is. Okay. If you have the luxury of doing that, great. But 9 times out of 10, you're really not going to have enough time to determine whether he's left-handed or right-handed. All you need to do is back up and turn. If you try and face your assailant, a lot of times that can get you shot as well. So it's really just better just to slowly back up until you feel it. And the second you feel it, then you're going to spin around. And you'll notice that you step into the attacker as soon as possible, because it allows you to pass the weapon, okay, get close in an area that the shooter's not expecting. It also means that you have more control over the weapon that he's got and over this whole technique at this point. So if he is a smaller or equal-sized person, then you can kind of continue with those techniques that we talked about before, kind of like the Russian 2-on-1, where you take him down the shoulder. However, if he is a taller person, then a lot of times you palm strike to the face, and basically keeping your forearm up and out across his face keeps him from being able to come around and being able to reach the firearm with his other hand or break free. So by keeping him locked up at this point, I've protected the weapon. I've basically rendered it safe for the moment, and at this point I can now attack. But if I don't keep that hand on him, he can recoil very quickly and get in there. So it's really important to keep that hand out there and striking him, pummeling that head as much as possible. And then once I've softened him up enough, take him down. Now, one of the things you do need to consider is if you accidentally turn into the target. If you do turn into the target, well, the technique pretty much stays the same. Just consider a few things. You do not want to continue to the rotation through to try and trap just the arm. The reason why is because you're going to end up exposing your back to the shooter. Rather, what you need to do is make sure that you use one technique we talked about when you're dealing with a larger person. That is, once you've trapped that firearm, is that you strike and create a distraction by softening up the target, punching him in the face, keeping his head away from you so he can't really focus. And then as you're kind of working with him and feeling his energy, you'll be able to take him forward or take him to the rear. In this case, take him forward, and then I have his arm still trapped, still pinched, and I'll be able to basically disarm him, and at that point, hit him on the head with a hammer. All right, so in summary, a couple of things. Number 1, movement, get off the X. Number 2, distance, close distance with the shooter. Number 3, time, create time by trapping that firearm. Number 4, disarm. Number 5, control the situation after the disarm. Okay. With that being said, a couple of things to take into account is understand the situation. First of all, this is the disclaimer. Okay, this is for educational purposes only. So if you go out there and use one of these techniques and get shot, don't come back on me. You need to go get professional training, and you got to practice. I've been doing it for a better part of a decade, and I'm still learning things every single day. With that being said, something to consider. In a situation, you have typically 2 types of shooters. You've got the passive shooter and you've got an active shooter. An active shooter is someone who is pretty much going to be mentally altered to the point where reason is not going to matter to him. He's probably in some different reality. You never know. Point is, he's walking into the room shooting at you. You're not going to have time to talk with him, most unlikely. You're not going to be able to wait to back up, feel that firearm before you do a maneuver. So those things just aren't going to work on an active shooter. Okay, these techniques are more for a passive shooter, someone who's trying to mug you, prove a point, instill fear, things like that. They don't necessarily want to kill you as much as they want to show their dominance and instill fear. So keep that in mind. Thank you for watching TAXA Magazine, and I'm Mark Anderson. Have a great day.